They called Prince a sissy out loud, on stage, in front of 18,000 people. You can see the pause, where everyone expects him to dodge it, laugh it off, or lose his cool. Because if he says the wrong thing here, that insult becomes the story, and his authority disappears in real time. Instead, Prince leans into the mic and delivers a response so calm, so controlled, it flips the entire room in seconds. And by the end of that sentence, the same crowd that was holding its breath is screaming because they just watched a reputation get defended and upgraded live. The year was 1982. The venue was the LA Forum, 18,000 capacity, sold out for Prince's controversy tour. He was still building his reputation, still proving that someone who looked like him, moved like him, dressed like him, could command a rock stage, could own an arena, could be taken seriously as an artist instead of dismissed as a novelty, a curiosity, something to gawk at, but never quite respect. The show had been going for an hour. Prince was giving them everything: guitar solos that made Hendrix disciples weep, vocals that ranged from falsetto to growl, choreography that was equal parts James Brown and Martha Graham, masculine and feminine, aggressive and vulnerable, refusing every binary that rock and roll had been built on. The crowd was electric. 18,000 people losing themselves in music that challenged everything they thought they knew about gender, about sexuality, about what a black man was allowed to be on a stage that had been dominated for decades by white men performing a very specific, very narrow definition of masculinity. Then someone in the crowd shouted it, loud enough that the band heard it, loud enough that Prince heard it, loud enough that the word carried through the arena like a weapon, like an accusation, like a challenge: sissy. The music stopped. Not gradually, not a planned pause, but abruptly, discordantly, like someone had pulled a plug. The band looked at Prince, uncertain what to do, whether to keep playing, whether to pretend they hadn't heard, whether to wait for Prince to give them a sign about how to proceed. Prince stood center stage, microphone in hand, sweat gleaming under the lights, wearing purple lace and leather and heels, looking exactly like himself, like everything that word sissy was supposed to diminish, supposed to make small, supposed to turn from powerful to pathetic. The arena went completely silent, 18,000 people holding their breath, because this was the moment. This was where Prince could lose everything: the authority he'd spent the last hour building, the spell he'd cast over the crowd, the belief that he belonged on this stage, in this arena, in this genre, that thought it knew exactly what rock stars were supposed to look like, and Prince wasn't it. The silence stretched, long enough to be uncomfortable, long enough that people started to shift in their seats, to wonder if this was still part of the show, or if something real was happening, something unscripted, something that might end with Prince walking off stage, or the crowd turning on him, or the whole carefully constructed evening collapsing into chaos. Then Prince smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a defensive smile, but that smile he got when someone had just made a mistake they didn't understand yet, when someone had given him an opening they thought was an attack, when the universe had handed him exactly what he needed to make a point he'd been wanting to make since he first picked up a guitar and realized that the world would try to make him choose between being a musician and being himself. Sissy? Prince repeated into the microphone, his voice calm, conversational, like he was considering the word, tasting it, trying to understand what the person who'd shouted it thought they were saying. That's an interesting word. Can someone tell me what a sissy is? Because I want to make sure I understand what you're accusing me of. The crowd was riveted now, the discomfort shifting into engagement, into recognition that Prince wasn't running from this, wasn't pretending he hadn't heard it, wasn't doing what most performers would do: move on quickly, redirect attention, act like the insult hadn't landed. Is a sissy someone who wears lace? Prince asked, touching his shirt. Someone who moves on stage in ways that you think are feminine? Someone who doesn't perform masculinity the way you expect men to perform it? Is that what makes someone a sissy in your understanding? He walked to the edge of the stage, looking out at the crowd, trying to spot whoever had shouted, though in the darkness of the arena it was impossible to tell. Because if that's what sissy means, then I guess you're right. I am a sissy. I wear lace, I wear makeup, I move my hips, I sing in falsetto, I do all the things that supposedly make a man weak, that supposedly make him less than, that supposedly mean he's not a real man. The crowd was completely silent still, but the quality of that silence had changed. It wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was anticipatory, electric, like everyone understood they were about to witness something important. But here's what I don't understand, Prince continued, his voice getting stronger now, more certain, like he was finding his rhythm, finding the argument he'd been building toward his entire career. If being a sissy means doing what I do, moving how I move, expressing myself the way I express myself, then how do you explain what just happened for the last hour? He gestured back at the stage, at his band, at the evidence of what they'd all just witnessed. For the last hour, you were on your feet, you were screaming, you were losing your minds to music created by this sissy. So what does that make you? If I'm weak, if I'm less than, if I'm somehow inferior because I don't conform to your narrow definition of masculinity, then what does it say about you that you paid money to be here? That you've been singing along? That until someone yelled that word, you were having the time of your life? The crowd erupted. Not in laughter, not in mockery, but in applause, in recognition. In that moment when an audience realizes they've been complicit in something and someone has just held up a mirror, showing them exactly what they've been doing. You know what I think sissy really means? Prince said, speaking over the applause, using it as fuel. I think sissy is what insecure people call anyone who threatens their understanding of how men are supposed to be. I think sissy is code for, I don't understand you. And instead of examining my own limited worldview, I'm going to try to make you feel small for not fitting into it. He walked back to center stage. But here's the thing about being a sissy. Here's what people who use that word as an insult don't understand. The things you're mocking, the lace, the makeup, the movement, the willingness to be vulnerable and sensual and express emotions that real men are supposed to suppress. Those things aren't weaknesses. They're courage. Prince picked up his guitar. It takes zero courage to perform masculinity the way society expects. To be tough, to be hard, to be emotionally closed off, to move through the world in ways that signal you're not feminine, not gay, not anything that might make other men question your manhood. That's easy. That's the default. That's what you get praised for, rewarded for, told you should be, from the moment you're born. He strapped the guitar on. But to stand on this stage, in front of 18,000 people, many of whom think men should look and act a certain way, and choose to wear lace, to move sensually, to express vulnerability, that takes courage. That takes strength. That takes the kind of power that people who use sissy as an insult will never understand, because they're too busy protecting their fragile sense of masculinity to risk anything. The crowd was roaring now. 18,000 people on their feet, understanding that they weren't just witnessing a response to an insult, but a manifesto about gender, about courage, about what real strength looks like when it's not performed according to scripts written by people too scared to be anything but conventional. So yes, Prince said, his voice rising to be heard over the applause, I'm a sissy. I'm proud to be a sissy. Because being a sissy means I get to be fully myself. Means I get to express every part of my humanity instead of cutting off half of it to make insecure people comfortable. Means I get to make music that moves people, that challenges them, that shows them what's possible when you stop caring about labels and start caring about authenticity. He hit a chord on his guitar, loud and aggressive, the sound cutting through the arena like a declaration of war. And you know what else being a sissy means? It means, I can do this. What followed was the most explosive guitar solo of Prince's career up to that point. Not just technically proficient, though it was that, fingers flying across the fretboard with speed and precision that made it clear this sissy could outplay almost anyone who'd ever been celebrated as a guitar god. But emotionally devastating, every note dripping with power, with aggression, with the kind of raw masculine energy that rock and roll had always celebrated, proving that you could wear lace and play like Hendrix, could move sensually and still command a stage, could be called a sissy and still be undeniably, inarguably, one of the most powerful performers anyone in that arena had ever seen. The solo went on for 10 minutes. Prince getting down on his knees, arching his back, playing in positions that were explicitly sexual, that evoked every stereotype about femininity and softness and sissy behavior, but doing it while creating sounds that were anything but soft, anything but weak, anything but less than the most celebrated masculine rock performances of all time. When he finally finished, when the last note rang out and faded into silence, the standing ovation lasted 12 minutes. 18,000 people screaming themselves hoarse, crying, jumping, losing their minds because they just watched someone take an insult that was supposed to diminish them and use it as fuel for one of the most powerful demonstrations of talent, confidence, and absolute refusal to be made small that any of them had ever witnessed. Prince stood up slowly, adjusted his guitar, walked back to the microphone. For everyone in here who's been called a sissy, who's been told they're too feminine, too soft, too much or not enough of whatever gender they're supposed to be, I want you to know something. Those words only have power if you believe them. If you let other people's fear of difference become your shame about who you are. He looked out at the crowd, at 18,000 people who were learning in real time that labels were weapons, and the way to disarm them was to refuse to be hurt by them. I was called a sissy tonight, and I could have been defensive, could have tried to prove I'm masculine enough by conventional standards, could have changed how I dress or move or present myself to make the person who shouted that word feel more comfortable. Prince shook his head. But that would be giving them power over me. That would be accepting their premise that sissy is bad, that femininity in men is something to be ashamed of, that conforming to narrow gender roles is more important than being authentically yourself. He smiled. So, instead, I owned it. I said, yes, I'm a sissy. And then I showed everyone here that sissy can play guitar, can command a stage, can make 18,000 people lose their minds. That sissy is just another word that scared people use when they encounter something that challenges their worldview. Prince started playing the opening notes to Purple Rain. This one's for everyone who's ever been called a name designed to make them small. For everyone who's been told they're not man enough or woman enough or whatever enough. For everyone who's learned that the way to deal with labels is not to fight them, but to redefine them. To take the power out of them by refusing to be ashamed of whatever they're supposed to shame you for. The crowd sang along, 18,000 voices joining his. And the song became more than music. It became communion, became a shared understanding that they'd all just witnessed something transformative, that the word sissy would never quite work the same way again after tonight, that Prince had taken a weapon and turned it into a badge of honor, a declaration of freedom, a refusal to play by rules designed to keep people small and manageable and acceptable. After the show, backstage, Prince's manager asked him why he'd stopped the show to address the insult. You could have just kept playing. Most people wouldn't have even heard it. That's exactly why I had to address it, Prince said. Because most people hear it. Every day. In different ways. Get called sissy or weak, or too feminine, or not masculine enough. And they don't have a microphone, and 18,000 people watching. They don't have the platform to say, no. Actually, there's nothing wrong with me. There's something wrong with a world that tries to make being different into an insult. He touched his lace shirt. I have this platform, and I can use it to either play along with conventional masculinity, make myself acceptable, prove I'm man enough by whatever narrow definition, or I can use it to show people that there's another way, that you can be exactly who you are, wear what you want, move how you want, express yourself fully, and not only survive, but thrive. The story of that night spread through the music community like wildfire. Other artists, especially those who didn't conform to gender norms, who'd faced similar insults, who'd been told they were too feminine or too masculine or too anything they heard about Prince stopping the show to reclaim the word Sissy, to turn an insult into empowerment, to show 18,000 people what courage actually looks like. Young people, especially, held on to that moment. Kids who were being called sissy at school, who were being mocked for not conforming to gender expectations, who were learning that being different meant being wrong. They heard that Prince had been called the same thing, and had responded not with shame, but with pride, not with defense, but with offense, not by changing himself, but by changing how the word worked. When Prince died in 2016, one of the tributes that went viral was from a man named Marcus, who wrote, "I was 14 inches 1,982, getting called sissy every day, considering suicide, because I couldn't figure out how to be the kind of man everyone said I should be. Then I heard about Prince stopping a show to reclaim that word, to say, yes, I'm a sissy, and that makes me powerful, not weak. That saved my life. Literally. Because it showed me that the problem wasn't me. It was a world with too narrow definitions of acceptable. Prince gave me permission to be exactly who I was. And that permission was the difference between giving up and growing up into someone who eventually learned to be proud of exactly what I'd been taught to be ashamed of. That's the legacy of that moment. Not a celebrity, owning a heckler. Not a witty comeback or a savage retort, but a lesson in power, in understanding that words only hurt if you believe what they're saying about you, that labels are weapons that lose their edge when you refuse to be cut by them, that the most revolutionary thing you can do when someone tries to diminish you is to stand taller, to own whatever they're accusing you of, to make it clear that their insult reveals their limitations, not yours. The person who yelled, "Sissy," thought they were exposing weakness. Prince showed them, and 18,000 witnesses, that they were actually exposing fear. Fear of difference. Fear of men who don't conform. Fear of a world where masculinity isn't defined by narrow, rigid, suffocating rules, but by confidence, by authenticity, by the courage to be exactly who you are, regardless of who thinks you should be something else. 18,000 people screamed that night. Not because Prince defended his masculinity, but because he redefined it, showed that being called a sissy and owning it, using it, making it powerful, that's more masculine, more courageous, more worthy of respect than any performance of conventional toughness could ever be. The sissy on stage. The insult meant to shame, and the response that turned shame into power, insult into badge of honor, mockery into manifesto about what real strength looks like when it's not afraid of lace, or vulnerability, or being exactly what scared people call it when they can't understand it. That's not just a retort. That's revolution. That's showing that the labels meant to control you only work if you let them. And when you don't, when you say, yes, I am exactly what you're calling me, and that makes me more powerful, not less. Those labels lose all their power, and the people wielding them are left with nothing but the revelation of their own small, scared, limited understanding of what humans can be when they refuse to be anything but fully themselves.